thank you for being understanding. And the reason why I put it like that is that, sometimes people say things to you and it may not have meaning at that time. And other times they might say something and you immediately know what they mean. When I started teaching, there was one of my teaching colleagues. She was probably twice my age, and she often made the comment to me, "I can read you like a book." And to me, it was just words at that time. I didn't really think about it, didn't mean much. It was only several years later that I began to understand what it means when you say, "I can read you like a book." Anyway, that's the assumption, I'm sure if I look at people like Rex now, I can read him like a book. He will dispute that, but that's okay. And that's the way we look at people sometimes, isn't it? I've known this person for a long time, and I think I know what they think, how they think, etc. No, I do, geez. I don't know Rex like a book at all. In fact, he's such a mystery sometimes. I wonder if I know him at all. Anyway, this afternoon, we're going to be focused on the section that Leanne has already read out. This is Hebrews chapter 5, verses 1 to 10. And I'm going to go through this and just explain some of the things and then look at how this ties in with the fact that this whole topic of being understood by someone else. Here we read that every high priest is a man chosen to represent other people in their dealings with God. He presents their gifts to God and offers sacrifices for their sins. Now, a week ago, I know Rex made reference to the last part of chapter 4, which also talks about the high priest, Jesus being the high priest, and this carries on. But I want to look at particularly this afternoon, the role of the high priest. The high priest was the leader. He was the top dog, if you like, among the priests in ancient Israel. And his job was like the priest, but he also was given other special jobs that only he could do. And in particular, during what we remember as the Day of Atonement, because he alone was the only priest that could go into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, and that was where God was living. So that was the role of the high priest. And as it says here, he was chosen from among the people. So he was one of the people. And he had dealings with the people. He related to the people. He understood the people. But his role was to present gifts to God and sacrifices to God on behalf of the people. He was the mediator, the bridge builder between the people and God. And that was his role. The people themselves couldn't approach God. They had to work through the high priest. And once a year when the high priest did enter the Holy of Holies, he brought sacrifices that basically was a sacrifice to ask God to forgive the sins of all the people of Israel for their sins over the past 12 months. That was his job. And so it was a very important job that this high priest had. This too. And he is able to deal gently with ignorant and wayward people because he himself is subject to the same weakness. So the high priest had to be human. He had to be able to relate to people, and people who were a bit stupid, or people who were sinners who did wrong, and he was able to deal gently with them. Why? Because he himself is subject to the same weaknesses. And that's why, because the high priest was a human being, when he went before God, he had to also offer sacrifices, first for himself, for his own sins, and then he offered a sacrifice for the people as a whole. So that was the role of the high priest, a very special role, but he was the bridge builder, the mediator between physical human being, flawed as they were, and the perfect God. Verse 4. And no one can become a high priest simply because he wants such an honor. He must be called by God. So you couldn't just put your hand up and be, I'll be the high priest. And you can imagine in the real world, if people were offered that option, who would like to be high priest? There would be certain types of their hands up, me, because they're so full of themselves, right? And you and I probably know people in our workplaces or in our neighborhood who fit that description. Me, because they're so full of themselves. Yeah. They worship themselves, and they hope other people would bow down literally and worship them. And so no one, the high priest role could just sort of volunteer. You couldn't volunteer to be it. God decided that. And he started the whole high priesthood line with Moses' brother, Aaron. And so Aaron became the first high priest. And he was called by God. Now, a high priest had been basically an honorable person who did the right thing, was obedient to what God wanted. And on top of that, he was supposed to be also quite perfect in certain other things. He couldn't marry a divorced woman, and and there are a few other things he could not do. Otherwise, he did not qualify to be a high priest. And so God chose who would be high priest. In fact, after Moses appointed people because God guided him, some people among the Israelites, particularly tribe of the Levi, that's where the high priest line came from the tribe of Levi. And Aaron was from the tribe of Levi. And there were people in among the Levites who thought that, this is not right, Why do some of these people get special positions? Are we all in the same category? Are we all deserving to have these special positions? Why, that person or that person? And there's the well-known story in the book of Leviticus, Leviticus, not Leviticus, this is actually Leviticus was talking about the role of the high priest. This song was, or Numbers chapter 16, won't go there, but I'll just briefly refer to it. And there was one individual called Korah, and he was the one who sort of said, well, why should only certain people be chosen to have special positions. And they challenged Moses on that one. And so Korah and two others in particular decided to stir up the community, and they managed to get 250 people to be on their side. It's like, if you think of the US presidency at present, you'll find there are certain people trying to drum up support. And so Korah is like that. He and his two cronies decided to try and drive support, and they managed to get 250 people to side with them. And Moses, when he heard about this, he said, no, these positions are chosen by God. It's not my doing. It's according to God. And he challenged Korah. He said, I want you and all you people, you to bring this, in a sense, holders of incense. I forget the name of it. It was well edited anyway. And he asked them, he said, I want you to captain, entrance the tabernacle, and you bring these, and we will see when you light yours, the fire, we will see what God does. And whether he will do something that will make it absolutely clear that you, Korah, and your lot are in the right, or whether you're not. And so finally, Korah and his team got there, and God, whoosh, opened up the ground underneath them and swallowed them up. Clear evidence that God was not working through Korah, And so the high priest position was something that was determined by God. And then when we challenged it, well, they were challenging God, and they had to pay for them. In verse 5, that is why Christ did not honor himself by assuming he could become high priest. No, he was chosen by God, who said to him, you are my son. Today I have become your father. And that's from Psalm chapter 2, verse 7, and dropping down verse 6 in Hebrews. And in another passage, God said to him, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And that comes from Psalm 110, verse 4. Now, when you just read that, it can be a bit confusing, because the writer of Hebrews basically just quotes two scriptures from different parts of the book of Psalms, and that's it. But when you actually do the background check, you'll find that the writer of Hebrews was writing to people in their time who knew what these scriptures referred to, who they referred to. And they knew, that the people at that time knew, that these two scriptures from the Psalms referred to the Messiah. We read it and we could wonder about, in the 21st century, what it's all about. But it was clear for them at that time. So Paul, the writer of Hebrews at that time made it clear that, Christ was chosen by God, and that was already predicted back in the book of Psalms. And then the reference to the fact that, especially verse 6, you are a priest forever, was to stress the fact that the Messiah would be a priest, a high priest forever. And that meant salvation for people who accepted Jesus' sacrifice would be forever. Now, unlike the physical high priest who had a term in office, normally up to the time he died. Right? Jesus didn't die. Once he was resurrected, he lived forever. So he's a high priest forever. He can go to the Father not once a year to bring our case, but he could bring it to the Father forever and as often as we want him to. He's there on the right-hand side of the Father. So unlike the physical high priest, he didn't have to wait 1 year to bring your sins or your offerings to the Father. So Jesus is the high priest. He was appointed and he was special. And the offering, unlike the physical high priest, they slaughtered an animal and they used the blood of the animal and put it on what's called the mercy seat inside the Holy of Holies. And that was, the blood was to bring to God and say, look, this is for you to offer mercy to all the people of Israel and for their sins, right? But when Jesus became the high priest, he offered himself, his sacrifice, and shedding of his blood. And so he didn't have to go every year and sacrifice some innocent animal. He did it once and forever. And that's why, when we know that, we can take comfort and absolute confidence that he will be there for us whenever and however often we want him. And verse 7, while Jesus was here on earth, he offered prayers and pleadings with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death. And God heard his prayers because of his deep reverence for God. Now, I mentioned that a high priest had to be human, and what we read here, particularly in verse 7 about Jesus, when he was on earth, he was human, fully human. And the reference to the fact that he offered up prayers and pleadings and a loud cry with tears, that references the fact that Jesus was fully human, he suffered, and therefore he understood, and he still understands what it's like to be human and to suffer. Because that's what the high priest had to do. He had to be human, so he could appreciate the people and relate to them. And God heard his prayers. Why? Because of his deep reverence for God, or as the NIV says, his submission to God. So Jesus qualified to be a high priest. Now, some people just go on and read these last few verses. Even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience of the things he suffered. So he suffered. Just like human beings suffer. Verse 9, in this way, God qualified him as a perfect high priest. Because he suffered, that qualified him to be a high priest. In other words, he could relate to human beings, to their challenges as physical human beings. And he became the source of eternal salvation for all. And that's, again, tying back to the fact that he's a high priest forever. So he's the source of eternal help and salvation for all those who obey. And God designated him to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now, there's a little bit about him being a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. It can be a little bit seemingly confusing, because Melchizedek is only referred to in very few places. Back in the time of Abraham, there's a reference, I forget exactly where in Genesis, but there's a reference to someone who was both a king and a high priest. and his name was Melchizedek. And so Jesus himself did not belong to the tribe of Levi. And that's when the high priest, physical high priest, came from, right? So how did Jesus qualify him to be a high priest? Yes, he qualified in the sense he was a human being and he suffered. So he experienced human suffering. But what entitled him to be a high priest? And this is where Melchizedek comes in, that he was also a high priest. The Bible does not give a lot else about him, right? That he was clearly a high priest. And Jesus was followed that line. He ordered Melchizedek. He didn't have to be belong to the tribe of Levi. He was, he was entitled because of Melchizedek. And so God appointed him to be high priest because he was qualified. Now, Jesus is our high priest. He brings our needs before God. He brings our sins before God, and he asks God for mercy on our behalf. And this C.S. Lewis quote from the book, The Problem of Pain, he writes, "Pain insists upon being attended to." I'm sure every one of us can relate that. If you've got any kind of pain, your pain is like a screaming child who insists on being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a dead will. Pain is God's, as C.S. Lewis put it, is God's megaphone to rouse a dead will. Now that's an interesting, just the way he put that. Pain is a very personal thing. When someone says, "I've got an aching back," they experience that aching back in a unique way, their way. When I have an aching back, I experience it my way. Now, we can sometimes easily jump to the conclusion that a backache is a backache, and my backache will be the same as yours. I don't believe that's true at all. In the last couple of weeks, since I've been blessed with, originally with pain, slight pain in the back, it's pins and needles or it's the fireworks of shooting pain. For me, it helps me appreciate that our pains are different. In the sense that my pain started in the lower back around the lumbar region, and it was a shooting pain, and it didn't matter what I did, how slowly I moved, how much I moved. It was ouch, 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 ouch. Really painful. Now, when I say really painful, that doesn't mean that my really painful is the same as what Gail might have experienced or what Pauline might experience. Not good my experience. One day, sometime in the future, I think we'll all bring our walking sticks and just compare, our walking sticks as I'll chat for that. But pain shouts to each one of us, but in a different way. And this is why it's really important that when we deal with other people, listen to other people, that we actually listen. A lot of us normally, someone says, I've got a problem. I'm suffering from something. I would say, oh, yeah, okay, look, I once had something like that, and we shut them down, not deliberately, but we just may tend to. I know what you're talking about, Rex, I had that once, and we assume that ours is the same. Again, I don't believe that, because my pain, it sort of went from the top of about from the hip down to the knee. And it sort of started in the hip, stayed there a couple of days, and it sort of wandered around down to the knee, and it sort of went back up to the hip again, and then sat around the knee like a naughty child. And it was painful. And there are times that, I'd stand up, not very long at all, and my knee would just ache. It would be so sore that I have to sit down. Fortunately, today, it's probably been less than it has been for ages. And probably just as well I'm sitting down, because I'm sure if I was standing up, I'd have been told something else. And then, so just to give you an idea, see, as my pain sort of subsided in one moment and yet seemed to have resurrected itself somewhere else, but later, Mallard would see me one moment, I seem to be right, walking around, and next moment I'm doubled over. Now, you can understand that for a short while, but if that goes on for several days, even my most understanding wife can be sure. She can think, what's wrong with you? I thought you were getting better. And I know I was getting better. I can feel there's less spasms, and it's not in the same place, and it's not as intense, but doesn't stop me from having to double over sometimes. And yet, to someone outside, it might look the same, and it's not. And that's, I believe, exactly what happens in other people. We don't know exactly how it affects them. And we can make assumptions. We can be dismissive. We could not care. And that's just sad, but, There was I briefly referred to an example. There was she's written a book called Maybe You Should See Someone. And she's a therapist. And she records the example of working with a man called John. And the man outwardly first seemed like he was on top of the world. He had everything sorted. He had a very successful TV show making business. He won lots of Emmys. And you would think, just looking at that, life was sweet. But the way he treated his workmates was he treated them with derision. He treated them as though they were definitely mediocre. And he looked down on them, and he spoke to them in a way that sort of basically says, you're nothing. And even to his wife, he obviously didn't treat her well. So there were problems there. And his children started to play up. So it got to a point where he knew he needed help because he couldn't sleep. So he goes to see this therapist. And when he first sees the therapist is trying to ask him some questions. And what does John do? He takes out his phone Now he's paying the therapist, right? That's right. He takes it as fire, engages fire, ignores the therapist until the point where the therapist is sitting just across the room, decides to send him a text message. Hello, I'm here. And so he just was a while. He just ignored, because he is the most important individual. He's the alpha man. You can wait. And this goes on for a few sessions. He was answered. And he went to see them because he couldn't sleep. In which he tried to ask him a few questions. He didn't answer them. But this therapist was very experienced and very smart. And she basically said to herself, in this room, I'm going to see you, and you're going to try to hide, but I will see you. And so slowly, she patiently worked with us. And then to the point where one day he actually did mention something about his wife and his children are ganging up on him. Whoa, it took a long time for him to reveal something like that as to why he couldn't sleep. Then a little bit later, he muttered something about someone. It was some boy's name. No reference, just muttered something about, I think he's getting emotional. And the therapist said, who's that person you told about? And he just picked up his phone, left the therapist, and didn't come back for several months. When he finally came back, he said to her, oh, that boy was my son. And when he finally told him that he said his son has now passed away. But he remembered the time when his son was 6 years old, and they were driving, and he was driving the vehicle. Son was there, and his cell phone rang as he was driving, and he was going. He looked down at the phone, and he was almost going to reach for it. And his wife was in the car and said, no, leave it alone. That's always a distraction. That's the cause of problems. So he didn't pick up the phone. But later on, as he was driving, he felt there was a moment where he could safely pick up the phone. He looked down that phone, going to pick it up. At that instant, crash. A vehicle crashed into her. And as a result of that, his son died. His 6-year-old son died. And from that time, he never said anything. Did not mention the son's name, did not talk about it, etc. And only came out finally when this patient therapist tried to ask him to give her some information that was useful. And then, after that, things improved. He even took his wife out for a date, and he actually enjoyed himself. Surprise, surprise. And one day he said to the therapist, he said, I don't want you to get a big head over this, but you are you are the person who you're the person who knows the most about my will you know more about my world, my life, than anyone else. And that comment brought tears to the therapist's eye. In other words, in her patience and her dealings with him, she was able to see him. She was able to hear his pain that he dared not talk about for years and years. And that's the challenge for us as we would with people, is that we be patient, that we are not deaf to their will, that we're not deaf to their needs. We don't make quick assumptions. We don't jump to conclusions. We don't dismiss them. We take time. And sometimes we zip our mouths so that we're listening. In the 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13, this shows us that how God is ready to help us. God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation or the test to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show your way out so that you can endure. And then 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 to 4. God is our merciful Father. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort others when they are troubled. We will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. You see, God wants us not just to come to help when we are suffering, when we are screaming with pain, but He wants us to then use that experience, reach out to others so that we can be a comfort to others. And how do you do that? You patiently listen to them, try to understand their pain, and try and get them to understand that there is a source of help. They can go to God the Father through the high priest, Jesus Christ, because He's always there if they want to. Just a reminder from the scriptures you will read yesterday, but so relevant, last week, but so relevant in Hebrews chapter 4 and verses 14 to 16. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for He faced all the same testings we do, yet He did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive His mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. I mean, how powerful and inviting is it when we understand we have a high priest who's there for us all the time, and there's no limit. And finally, in summary, we, even Christians, will suffer pain of some kind, be it physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and some of those are, to us humans, invisible. Right? You can't look at the person and say, I know you're suffering, because it doesn't always show up, and we're good at hiding. Jesus understands about human suffering. Why? Because He suffered. He's been fully human. He understands what it is like to be mocked or marginalized or whatever. To understand another's pain often takes our time, commitment, and holding our tongue, because it's so easy to rush in and give the quick fix when it's not really the right thing. So, if you got a note, not you, but if you saw a note, thank you, whatever the name, whoever's name, for being understanding. If it's your name, I'm sure you will be so glad that you got that note or that acknowledgement that you took the time, had the patience, and the commitment to be understanding of another person's sufferings.